Get started. Welcome everyone to Koksilah Music Festival. This is a discussion with Indigenous youth on land defense and mental health, among other things. I'm coming in from Lekwungen territory, and the topic that we're going to be discussing today and the panelists are going to be discussing is around healing and doing land defense work. The front lines can be romanticized, and so folks are going to be sharing some of their firsthand experiences on the front lines and what healing and doing land defense means to them. So I just wanted to start, I guess, also I'll just introduce myself. I'll be moderating the panel today. My name's Gina Mowat. My mom is of settler descent and my dad is Giksan. I am Frog Clan from the house of Lutkitsiwis and Shimutsin, and I grew up on Snunaz and Snuneymuxw territory, and I'm now on Lekwungen territory. I've done some work with Indigenous youth for Wet'suwet'en, and I work with my nation, and I also work in the School of Child and Youth Care at UVic. So just so folks know, before we get started, we're doing a fundraiser for healing and supporting Indigenous youth who are doing land defense work and who are on the front lines. And so you can find that chuffed page on the chat on Facebook and on the main page of the Koksilah website. But first, I just thought maybe we could all together, everyone who's like watching, and then all the panelists, we could take a couple deep breaths. And if you can, like maybe put your feet on the ground and like pull your shoulders back and close your eyes if you want. And we'll just take a few deep breaths together. In through your nose and out through your mouth. In through your nose. And big breath out. And we'll do one more. You can open your eyes. Just wanted to like bring everyone kind of in together in that energy, and the topic that we're going to be discussing is a really important topic, and just want to express my respect to all the people on the panel that are going to be sharing, and hopefully everyone who's listening can also hold the stories in respect and care, and be a passive listener, but find ways to take action to support Indigenous youth on the front lines. So with that, we will get into it a little bit. So we'll start with each of the panelists introducing themselves. So who you are, where you're from, where you're at now, and also what brought you into frontline work. And just whoever wants to start can start, and we can go through it like that.
Hey, can everyone hear me? Sego, skeno jihet, ni wenya de yongets, hoda nashoni, anadage kwa de hat gatos. My settler name is Shiloh Hill, from Six Nations, Ontario. Onondaga Beaver Clan. My mother's Irish. I grew up on between Six Nations in Toronto. I've been doing this kind of work for a while. I'm pretty exhausted. I guess it for me started when I was about 7. My father was one of the warriors in Oka So kind of heard and seen a lot at a young age. And just growing up, my dad would go out and stop different logging operations in the territory where they're logging old growth forests or trying to protect certain watersheds. And I was always exposed to that. So that's where that began for me, being born into it. Our word actually, the Haudenosaunee word for our warrior society is Hodi Sketa. It means we have the burden of upholding the peace. So we like to, I call ourselves Hoodie Skep over warriors. It's more of a duty or a responsibility we're born into. Uh, so yeah, a little about myself. I I was I don't know if many are familiar with what happened in Caledonia in 2006, but I was heavily involved with reclaiming a parcel of land there from a company called Henco that acquired a bunch of land that was still part of the reserve and was never really legally acquired. Um, so we shut that down. We actually, it wasn't so much a protest. We actually like fought the cops. Like we fought them physically and kind of through creator thankfully overpowered them, and managed to keep them at bay since then. And that kind of ties into what's going on at Land Back Lane, but I'll touch on that in a minute. Also, I was in Standing Rock. I went to jail in Standing Rock. Um, I started one of the major camps down there, the Haudenosaunee camp, which was a pretty big camp. I was there for around 7 months. I seen a lot there. I went through a lot there. I'll touch on that later on too. But there was a lot of violence we went through. I went through. Um, and then I took a bit of a break for a few years, and then I ended up at Get 'em Den in 2019. Then again in 2020, I was one of the four people that were arrested at Get 'em Den for peacefully standing on my girlfriend's father's territory. My girlfriend's father is Chief House Chief Was. So we were um, part of the organizing in Ontario for like the whole shutdown Canada thing. Um, yeah, just I'll pass it on, but there's quite a few things I've done. I'm really grateful to be here and meet everybody and share that with you. Pass it on.
Thanks, Shiloh.
Huntla Ottoman Squesht, Tulin Kalminkin. I belong to the Intlakatlin Nation. My name is Autumn Walkham. I'm calling in from Kalmin, which is my ancestral territory and the territory that I'm most familiar with growing up on. It means the healing waters, and that is the waterfall in the creek that runs through my territory. And I think that for me, like when I started thinking about the front lines was probably when I was around 15. And I learned about how the chief of my band had signed on to the Kinder Morgan pipeline, which is now known as the TMX, without community knowledge or consent. And the anger and grief that I felt from that, and then kind of after that, like Burnaby Mountain and Standing Rock were things that had happened that I had wanted to go to, but I wasn't exactly allowed to when I was in high school. When I was attending UVic in 2018-19, that's when the 2019 raid of Wet'suwet'en territory happened, and I was very horrified and very angry to see that happen and to see it talked about in all of my classes, but no offers of support. And so when I finished the school year there, then I made the decision to go up to Unistoten Camp and Unistoten Healing Center. And I spent the next year and a bit there. And during that time, there was a couple close calls with threats of arrest from police, but ultimately I was arrested last winter in the 2019 raids that occurred on Giremden and Unistoten. And I was among one of several people that were arrested at Unistoten for that. I'd like to pass it on to whoever'd like to introduce themselves next.
My name is Shaylen Sampson. I come from the Giksan Nation. I'm a member of the Lachgibu, which is the Wolf Clan, and Wilpsboch, so the House of Spoch. I grew up in Hegelgat for the most part. I moved to Simshan territory when I was in high school, and then from there I moved down to Lekwungen, Saanich, and Songhees territory to attend the University of Victoria. Before that, I wasn't involved in a lot of organizing. It wasn't until I met a lot of people doing great climate justice work in the city that I got involved. That led up to just meeting a lot of rad people who were organizing already and a lot of BIPOC people who were doing really cool organizing in the city. Um, I was one of the organizers involved with Indigenous Youth for Wet'suwet'en, and I was one of the youth that were arrested on the final night of our reoccupation of the BC legislature in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en. A lot of my relatives come from the Wet'suwet'en Nation. I grew up in Hegelgat, which is a shared village between the Giksan and Wet'suwet'en, um, and have like a lot of strong relations that still exist today. Since last spring, I moved to Gidimt'en territory of the Wet'suwet'en and have been living here at camp that actually Shiloh was at during the raids last year on Wass's territory. And so I've been really thankful to be here, and that's still where I am now. But yeah, I'll pass it on to whoever's next.
Nugwa Makwala through Mayanidi, through Khanalas, Ayuthanlach, Quadgil, through Mampagila, through Tlawitzis, through Koksilah, through Numpkis. I come from the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation. My government name is Dakota. My father's side, I come from the Quadgil and the Numpkis, with roots to Bella Bella, as well as my dad's dad was English and Irish. On my mother's side, I'm Mumpgila and Tlawitzis, also Koksilah, and with roots to Tlingit on that side as well. My mother has like a long history of doing direct action, such as was direct action in Cache Creek, BC, in which she was like in her 20s at this point. And the like the hospital and the funeral home, they weren't allowing the Indigenous people from that area to perform their ceremonies on their dead. So she was involved in a armed direct action there with those people and taking the body back so they could actually perform their traditional ceremonies. She's also involved in things like she had to fight the Ministry of Child Welfare in Victoria, BC, and actually pretty much single-handedly got custody of our niece with the help of just actually the homeless community in Victoria, BC. And because of that, she really got involved in the um, tent cities that were going on on the island, Vancouver Island. And that's when I started getting involved in helping her out and helping out various communities, homeless, Indigenous, and there was my nation, the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation, was doing direct action, fighting the fish farms, in which I had friends and relatives such as Nabidu, who were on those fish farms. So me and my mother did solidarity actions in the capital to highlight those things. And And so, yeah, I was part of an action in which we occupied one of the marine harvests vessels, which would bring the salmon to these fish farms, and we occupied it on the dry dock, and we were all arrested and like held for like 10 hours, and never charged or anything like that, because they had nothing on us. Yeah, and since then, mostly I focus on um, working within my own tribe, the Koksilah, and trying to highlight our plight for our land reclamation, as we're the only tribe in the Kwakwaka'wakw Nation that isn't recognized by INAC or the government. We're actually considered extinct. So there's a lot of work being done in that regards with my Amber's family. Yeah.
Nugo yatala galistamega gayushlin la muskama zawadeno. Um, my name's Navidu Taylor, and I'm from Kinkom Inlet, or Upanali, sorry. I guess I started off um, in this work, I guess, when I was quite young. We fought against logging in Hada, which is a very sacred um, part of our territory for the Muskamadzawadinach. That is where the two wolf brothers, Kaudilchla and Kwalili, first met. So we hold that place very close to our hearts. And the fish farm, I was part of the fish farm occupations that happened in 2015, I think. Damn, I don't even remember. But we did a few occupations and rallies for the open net fish farms that are in Muskama territory with no consent from the territory. Um, the it's also the Namgis are on the same boat with the fish farms. But I was also a part of the Indigenous Youth for Wet'suwet'en movement, and I was one of the 5 youth that were arrested in the Parliament building on our last day there. I don't know. It definitely is um, a hard like job or burden, I guess, to carry. Um, and the front lines are romanticized, but I, I'll pass it on to someone else now.
Sweet. Yeah. Thanks everyone for sharing those stories. It's really nice to hear the different ways that we've been brought to this work and through like family legacies and ancestral legacies and anger and grief. So it's really nice to hear those stories. Thanks for sharing that. So the first question I'm gonna like put out there for you all, and then if you everyone wants to go through and like share their thoughts on it or however you feel like engaging is fine. But we've talked a little bit before about um, how hard this work is and how difficult it is on our own mental health, like our physical health, but also mental health. And so I'm wondering if you folks want to share a little bit about like what you see um, as barriers to healing when doing this work, because I think we all have healing work to do, and that's made we have more healing to do once we're on the front lines in these hard positions. So, yeah, I guess if what kind of barriers do you see as barriers to healing and promoting mental health? on the front lines. And whoever wants to jump in, I think can, and then we can just make sure everyone gets a turn to talk.
Jump in on that. I think capitalism in general is a huge barrier to that. Like example, when I got back from Standing Rock, I don't know if you guys remember me saying last week, like I saw that girl's arm blown apart, like 6 inches of flesh hanging off bone, and like that was just one day. Like there was 7 months of almost every day something violent happening to somebody, and then once that was said and done, and everyone's got to go back to their lives. It's like I was just spewed back into Toronto, and just like, okay, now I got to survive, and then like having to work a job and do things like that where people nobody else just went through what we went through. So like having to like reintegrate yourself into society after you go through something so traumatizing, or something so life changing, that for me was a challenge, was just normality, a sense of normality after seeing such like malicious, violent behavior on peaceful people. Um, I'll pass it on.
I think that there's a lot of barriers to our healing and mental health associated with frontlines, and I think that people really um, apparently sound isn't working. Can you guys hear me all right?
I can hear you.
I can hear you as well.
Okay.
I can
Definitely.
hear you as well.
Oh, it's not working on the streaming. I guess we can wait a second.
Okay.
Sorry. Hold that thought.
Just quickly stuff my face.
What are you eating?
Thimbleberry jam.
um, that sounds nice.
I don't know the sound from.
though, right? So people can watch afterwards with no lag.
Did you guys see the host comments?
Yeah, I was just seeing if we're back. Is sound back on? Maybe. I'm trying to type, but it's not letting me. Maybe Nikki or someone. It's only letting me send a message to Nabidu. Okay, no, it's everyone. Okay, no one heard what you said. But and if you
Yeah,
want
I can. I can repeat myself after Autumn if that works.
okay,
Okay.
cool.
Can you tell me when to start? Can you tell me when to start?
I'm just waiting to get confirmation from someone in the chat. Okay, they said they'll tell us when, so we'll just wait.
Does anybody else have coolberry jams at their house?
I got some Migma blueberry jam that I haven't tried yet, but I'm really excited about.
Wow.
Some pinkies jam?
Yeah.
Nice.
Banana jam a thing?
Banana jam. Banana jam. Ooh. Ooh.
That sounds.
I mean, with peanut butter, dude.
Yeah, or like Nutella. Or I don't know. Maybe not.
I thought Nutella was
Okay, you guys
canceled.
have
Palm oil.
Oh yeah.
They're killing their things.
Thank God.
We evolved from monkeys. I remember having a awkward conversation with a person from the sea shepherd, and there were scientists that believed we only evolved from monkeys.
I love that for them. Okay.
I love.
Go. Oh, were you gonna say
Just continuing on to the question, what are barriers to healing and frontline work? I do think that people underestimate just what financial security means to someone on the front lines because on the front lines, there's kind of a lack of supporters there, which means that the people who do go there work themselves to burn out physically and mentally, emotionally. Wherein last winter, everybody I knew who got the privilege of seeing a doctor had been diagnosed with back sprains, shoulder sprains, just like the expense of physical labor on the body was really harsh. But also, remind what it does to you to be out on a territory every day, knowing that every time you go outside, you're going to see police, you're going to see industry workers, you're going to hear the destruction of the land. Like, that's a very violent thing to have to go through. And when you're so busy with the work, you don't really have the opportunity to kind of search for a therapist or a counselor. And as well, you are tied to the land and the community there because while the front lines are overly romanticized, there can be beautiful relationships that are made there and beautiful examples of community care and revolution. And when you are giving so much to a space, it's hard to leave. And it's like when you're there for a long time, you lose whatever housing stability you might have had beforehand. You lose whatever job you might have had beforehand. You lose a lot of friends and a lot of your relationships with family because of the work that you are doing. And even when you leave, it's very isolating because people don't understand what your life has been like. You can't talk about a lot of the things that you've been through or what your everyday was like because of security culture, because of trauma, and because people just don't get it. They don't understand. So I really understand what Shiloh was saying when he was bringing up that point about leaving Standing Rock. And so when you leave the front lines, there's too the fact that you are dead broke. All the money that you gave to be on the front lines, all the gas you paid, it leaves you at a very bottom place where suddenly you have to look for work again. And it's harsh to kind of subscribe to capitalism and that's what you're fighting, but it's not really negotiable. For me, a guarantee of my mental health is having a car. It means I don't have to hitchhike. It means I don't have to rely on unsafe people or unknown people to get from here to the front lines or to a job or to anywhere that I need to go. But along with that comes the maintenance and the insurance and the risk of being pulled over by police wherever I go. So financial security for me means that I'm able to maintain my car and not get pulled over for police because there's a crack in the windshield, which there's a crack in my windshield right now. And counseling and therapy is important. And I do think that if you have the opportunity to see a counselor or therapist, you should try to take it. And it's hard to find the right match. I think that I've spoken to probably 6 or 7 counselors in my life, and most of them I really didn't like. But luckily, I have 2 right now that I've been talking to since around last fall and this winter that I do appreciate having the option to talk to every now and then. But what financial security also means is that I can buy myself art supplies to do art, which takes care of my mind and my emotions. And I think that care for people on the front lines just doesn't look like what you typically think of care. Here's a therapist, good luck. I'm passing it back to Shay.
Yeah, I'm just gonna repeat a bit of what I said because I guess folks couldn't hear me on the stream. Um, I think there are a lot of barriers, like a lot that Autumn outlined about being on the front lines, and I think a big one is just not being able to take a break or feeling like you can't take a break. I've been here on Girimdanyinta for about a year now, and it's a lot to just live here in this frontline space and to constantly have industry driving by and to constantly have the police driving by. And to know that wherever I go on the Yinta, where I'm a welcome guest by the hereditary chiefs here, that I'm still going to be harassed by industry, by the police, by the private security that they hire to be on the territories. There's also been a number of mental health issues in my family that I had to leave this space, which is already a high stress space a lot of the time, to go into another high stress scenario and supporting my family through mental health issues and also having to cope with my own. And so there's been a lot of times where it's just really hard to deal with all of those compounding issues. Financial barriers have also come up a lot for me in being here. I left my job last winter to be at the legislature. And then from there, I just moved home and directly moved to the front lines. And so I haven't had stable work in almost a year now. And so there's a lot of relying on other people and other people's generosity in order to be able to do this work. And I'm really thankful for the people that have been able to support me, but it's also really straining to not be able to have that independence. I just started a job that I can do remotely from here, but that's also um, I'm doing work on top of the work that I already do to be here. And so there's all these different things, and I don't want to feel like I have to choose between financial stability and being able to defend the territories of my relatives and my family. And so I think it's really important that we talk about what it means to be here and how we all get to heal because that'll look different for different people. And for me, I've been really thankful to be able to be so close to the Wedzenqua, the river that runs through Wet'suwet'en territories, and to be able to, in the spring and the summer, go into it and just bathe in the river. I actually did it last week, and it was really cold, but just finding those little moments um, that you have to carve out for yourself because it can get so intense to be here all of the time. And yeah, I think that's it.
Thanks, Shay. Nobs or Makula, do you have anything you want to share on that question?
Mm,
Yeah, I can a bit. Um, jeez, mental health. um, yeah, it's definitely really hard, and it's very complicated as like indigenous people like on the front lines fighting such overbearing forces like corporations and government, which are aligned in a way to basically take away our rights and our resources for the sake of the national, like the economy, and and you're putting mental health on the line, physical health on the line, your life on the line, and you're also trying to overcome colonialism in our own communities and dealing with the issues that we already have from uh, generational trauma, residential schools, racialized police violence. When you're not even, not even doing direct action, you face these things, just trying to have a good time as a teenager, So we all kind of grew up with these realities, and then we put ourselves into these situations where we have to deal with both our trauma and like the past trauma and the ongoing trauma, putting ourselves in these situations where we're faced directly with either just like blatantly racist settlers or the police, um, and like like even like a year later after like all the legislature stuff, and sometimes seeing like the pictures that are posted online, especially like a year later as the anniversary of it or whatever, like remembering the police violence against indigenous women and two-spirit peoples, um, literally them grabbing women by the hair and throwing them around, and like I was almost run over by a police SUV, and after like dealing with everything, like when like your friends like on the front lines are go to other front lines and you can't talk to them because of security culture or whatever, and trying to get mental health therapists, and this is when like like COVID first came in, and like getting a therapist was actually pretty fucking hard. Um, you know, Trying to get onto certain medications, seeing what works for you, um, traditionally and whatnot. For me, I end up having to go home and being with my own Kwakwakwa community. So yeah, I don't know. I guess that's just a little bit of my reflections on the difficulties of dealing with mental health.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. Nobs, did you have something to say or?
sorry, do you mind if you repeating the question?
Yeah, just like thinking about barriers to like healing and mental health when we're on the front lines?
Okay. Um, there's a lot of violence that does happen on the front lines, and that isn't really spoken about, I guess. Like, not, I mean, I guess people understand that systemic violence happens, but there's also violence that happens usually with older men on the front lines. That really affected my mental health when I was occupying at the Muskuma Zaudeno fish farm, midsummer. Um, yeah, it's hard because you never really know who's coming to support the front lines. Um, and I feel like a lot of good people come, but a lot of bad people with really horrible intentions come to the front lines as well. Um, it's hard when sometimes the people that do have bad intentions are the people that we are looking up to take care of the communities. It's just yeah, something that's been really hard for me to like sit with, and I'm also dealing with that in my own community, I guess. I mean, I've lived in Lekwungen territory for 3 years, but I was just like the after effects of the Wet'suwet'en movement just really opened up a lot of past trauma that I was carrying from the front lines before that I didn't get the chance to work on. Um, so it is dangerous to be on the front lines because you're putting yourself at risk for violence. But I do understand that we're also doing this to protect our people from violence, but we do need to know that breaks are healthy, and taking care of yourself is a very big responsibility, and I understand that, but I want you to know that none of you guys are alone. And yeah, I don't know. It's just, I love all the people and youth that are out there, but I also want you to know that I am saying prayers for you. And I don't say that to much people, so I love you.
Thanks, Knobs. Shiloh, did you have something you wanted to say?
Yeah, I'd just like to say thank you actually for bringing that up because that's a very important thing. Like, a lot of the front lines I've seen, like people there that come, their hearts aren't really in the fight. They're more there uh, with bad intentions. And I think that's one of the number one barriers to our well-being in the front line is not knowing who we allow around us, what type of people, like, I guess, like screening people, or but that's a hard thing to do because we want people to come and join us in this fight, and sometimes there's not always a lot of time in the presence of police to screen our people when we got A, B, and C to take care of. But that's definitely been a prevalent thing that I've seen in almost everything I've been a part of over the past 20 years. And that's one of the main things that starts to break down movements too. There's always those few bad apples that come in, and then it gets people questioning the movement, and I'd just like to say thank you for touching on that for sure. Um, there was one thing I meant speak upon as well, if I have a minute here, was another thing that seems to get in the way of healing is like, it seems like like obviously we all know, but like they criminalize us. They put us through a system that isn't designed for our spiritual well-being. You know, they choose the rights of industry workers over the inherent rights of indigenous people. You were supposed to be born with these rights to be able to go out on the land, and you know, the Wet'suwet'en were never conquered by England. So somewhere along the line, you know, what the crown wanted was more important than the Wet'suwet'en's inherent rights on their own territory, to a point where they come in large numbers and point guns at us, you know, point guns at pregnant women, put pregnant women in jail cells, leave pregnant women locked up in the back of a paddy wagon in freezing temperatures for hours, you know, like how is that justice? You know, there's no justice in that. But it's hard to heal in a world that's like not designed for us to heal. Everything's designed to break us. But I'll leave it at that. So.
Yeah, thanks so much, Shiloh. And yeah, thanks everyone for sharing your insight and your experiences with, yeah, trying to access healing on the front lines and these barriers. And I think it's interesting. A few people shared about how, like, we're trying to break cycles within ourselves and our communities of intergenerational harm and trauma, while also simultaneously like resisting ongoing trauma and ongoing violence from the state. And I'm wondering if you folks have any reflections on that, like how do we do those things at the same time, like continue to try to break those cycles of historical and intergenerational of harm, and continue to do the resistance work that we're doing.
For myself, what I think that means is addressing the gendered and sexualized violence and misogyny that is present on the front lines and is pretty epidemic, I think. I think that there are a lot of predatory men, even though it's not just men who do this harm. But I think that these kind of men tend to flock to the front lines because they know from the moment they get there, they'll be upheld as doing the work. They'll be like, oh, wow, look, this man finally showed up on the front line that's mostly women, mostly two-spirit people. So because of all of, it's like they get instant respect, and with that respect comes kind of a position of authority and trust that they may not have earned. And it's so dangerous because men who have any sort of authority, whether that comes with age or the position they're in, can take advantage of that. And from the moment that I showed up on the front lines at 18, I had to deal with a lot of like 30-year-old men preying on me. And I didn't recognize it at the time. The behaviors that they showed were wrong. I just knew that they made me uncomfortable and no one was paying attention. And ultimately, like, that sort of violence is what made me realize that I needed to leave. Having witnessed, I guess, or like knowing it had happened to me and my friends while there is a kind of heartbreak that comes with a lot of anger that these men do these things and get away with it, and that even when it's talked about, they are still upheld, or they are still not given any sort of accountability process where it's framed in such a way to keep them in the community. And one of the things that I think that these misogynists do intentionally is whatever skills they have, they won't share them. they won't teach anyone else how to use a chainsaw, so they kind of make themselves the important person there. And it means that it makes it harder for the leadership to consider asking them to leave almost, because they're like, oh, well, if no one else knows how to use a chainsaw, well, we can't ask this guy that's a predator to leave, which is wrong, but it's really intentional, that sort of manipulation are capable of doing on the front lines. And it's really ugly how it makes our communities, because it's not restricted to the front lines. It's in our everyday lives that men act this way, whether it's on our reserves or in our homes or in the streets. It's this violence that you can't seem to escape. And it doesn't just come from men. Like, I know that when I was on the front lines, a lot of the industry workers made comments to me, or just the way that they look at me every time they drove by, they'd just slow right down. And even like it got to the point where other supporters, they're like, why are they driving so slow? They never drive that slow. Oh, they're looking at you. And on the radio calls, like, there was this time that there was this man who was just singing Alouette, Chante Alouette for a full minute straight, which was very creepy, because like, as soon as it started happening, it's like, is anyone going to believe me? But then another friend was walking by, and we were both just staring at this radio that's just going on and on and on as this guy is singing to me, because I'm the one he knows is on the other side of the radio. It's with these frontline communities, like, we are resisting colonialism, which means we are resisting sexualized violence, but we are kind of more blind to the ways that we perpetuate it. We can see it in the industry, we can see it in the man camps, we can see it in the enemy, but we can't see it in the people that we love. And it does a lot of damage, and it's very traumatizing, I think, for everyone who's been hurt by this sort of violence, to be met with disbelief, to be kind of deprioritized, for the man to be like upheld as, well, he needs his healing journey, and so we're not going to offer you any supports, we're not going to allow you the chance to tell your story, etc. And I don't know. It's something that I think about every day, and with my peers who have similar experiences, we're always trying to figure out, how do we address this, because we know that this is what has taken down movements before, Red Power, AIM, that even now people don't want to talk about that part of it, but it's here today, and it's not going anywhere, and it's not changing if we're not even able to admit that it's there. I'd like to pass it on.
Yeah, thanks, Autumn. I think that like idea of like it sometimes comes across as like putting the movement before the actual people, and like thinking about not only how that harms people who are experiencing that violence, but also like what kind of future are we creating when that is a part of our movement. And that's in the work we're doing, is we're allowing misogyny and patriarchy to actually inform all the steps we're taking to try to create this world that we're working towards. So yeah, thanks for sharing that. Does anyone else have thoughts?
I think what she's saying is very true, because like there was people even in Standing Rock I seen that had a position of respect from people, but they would use that as like sort of a cape and crown to like kind of waltz around and, like I said, be there for the wrong reasons. And that even goes back to what someone else said earlier about how some people get this like rock star status from doing this kind of stuff, when it should really be focused on like what it's about, you know. But I've definitely seen that. It's definitely a thing. And I think that's another thing in healing is it's important to not give certain people also too much attention, because there's a lot of people out on front lines that have put in the most work that get the least attention, you know. So it's always, I think it goes with how we hold each other up. What do we do to hold each other up is to always make people feel appreciated, and to not give that much power to people, because there are people out there that will misuse that power. uh, just wanted to say that.
Yeah, I think I'd add that there's so many ways that our people have picked up the harms that have done unto us. Um, there's a lot of ways that our people have learned to recreate that violence that colonialism brought into our communities. Um, there's so much healing that still needs to be done. I know even during our time at the legislature, there was a lot of moments where we had to mitigate those issues of violence coming up within our own communities. It's also something I've witnessed here and been impacted by here. And so I think it's so important that we have those conversations. Yeah, it can be really difficult for some people, and especially people who are directly impacted by that harm. And so just finding ways that we can recreate love in our communities and support the people who are being impacted, I think is really important. It's something that I feel that I'm still learning how to do. Um, and I think it's a really big process to unlearn everything that settler colonialism has taught to us in the ways that we value each other as individuals and within community. Um, but I think there's still a lot of work to be done, and like you said, Gina, in a, in recreating this world for ourselves, we have to be able to let go of that misogyny that's so ingrained in our communities from colonialism, and really look at what it means to support individuals and people that are coming up in our communities, especially young Indigenous women and Two Spirit and femmes. So
Um, I would just like to thank Autumn for those very powerful insights. Those were very, very deep and very strong to come forward with. Uh, and Shiloh and Shay, yeah, those points were very important, especially about how how those points were very important, like how we should be talking more about movements than actual individuals and such. And um, I don't know. I'd like to also talk about like the colonialism that we face from intergenerational trauma, and how have to fight that stuff as we're on the front lines. And I think that a lot of where our power can come from is community, and like community um, accountability. And that doesn't, like, I feel like a lot of people, especially think that like talking about like sellers as well, like they think like everything begins and ends at a rally, or we're holding like picket signs and stuff, but that's not true. It begins and ends in like community, like on the ground level. um and yeah, a lot of stuff has already been said about misogyny and gendered violence. I kind of want to talk a bit about classism and the kind of prejudice I've seen on front lines, specifically right now talking about legislature with our homeless communities, with people with mental health issues. How many times I've had white people come up to me and say they didn't trust somebody who was obviously homeless, obviously had mental health issues, and all I do is I go talk to them, and they're not a threat. You know, they're not. They just need someone to acknowledge them. They just need someone like I don't know how many times that I had somebody who was homeless talk to me when I came up to them, approached them, just talking to them like a fucking human, and they were just like talking about how great it was to have a place to be. Like this is in between some of the tent cities, and they finally had a place to go to feel safe, you know. And they only had that place to be safe because we were taking up space as indigenous nations in the Americas, and some of the best, some of the most radical politics I got to speak with people came from those communities, you know. Um, and we ignore them a lot of the time. Like, and as somebody else was saying earlier, how we hold up people who show up on the front lines, and that happens in our own communities. That happens in white settler communities that hold up indigenous people who show up to these protests, these radical Indians or whatever. But there's so many other people who have so much to offer our communities, so much to offer our communities, and they're poor, they're on the streets, they have addictions, and that doesn't mean that we should ignore them, you know. um, we have an epidemic right now with this COVID, but we also have an epidemic with drugs, fentanyl, and that shit is on the streets, and people are dying from it at an alarming rate. I recently lost a brother, and I know for a fact that if there were safe, like injection sites, places that would test drugs like 24/7, like he would be alive today. But he's not, because we don't, as a whole, we don't look at those people as part of our solution when in fact they are the very bedrock of our solution. It, that's, I believe, where community begins and ends, and that's something we need to hold up and look at more often. Um, I want to apologize for maybe getting a little bit heavy here or whatever, but this is something that's been weighing on my mind for the past week or so. So, yeah.
Thanks so much for bringing that up. And yeah, I think that's something that is overlooked. Like all of our relatives that are part of the unhoused communities, and not like specifically here, like in the Kwangin territory, 1/3 of the unhoused people are indigenous, and how like yeah, colonialism is ravaging and destroying our lands, and that's where the front lines are. But also thinking about the front lines here in cities where so many of our people are continuing to be displaced by settler colonialism and oppressive policies, etc., right here. And yeah, it was something actually that came up at the legislature too. Like elders would come and visit us and be like, there's a lot of, your relatives who are in the unhoused community that want to stand with you too. So thanks for bringing that up. Um, does anyone have anything else they want to share on that before I move on to the next question?
I would. I think that was bang on what you said. As someone that spent a pretty good chunk of their life homeless, I used to between I left the res when I was about 16, and I moved to Toronto, and I was living under a bridge in Spadina with a bunch of punk rockers, and that's kind of like how I spent a lot of my early like youth, was like traveling. And I understand homelessness and like being looked at like you're just garbage because of how you look or where you're at. And like I've also been through like my struggles, and I look at the things that I've accomplished since then. It's like it's never too late. Like, never judge anyone for having. Can you guys hear me? Okay. It's never too late to to change it around, like I think there's probably people out there that think like there's no way out of that life, but then I was able to do things with my life and change it around. And I've talked to like younger homies down here on the reserve all the time, like about how it's never too late to like turn it around. And there's some of our strongest, wisest warriors are out there on the street. Some of our best ones are out there on the street. And my heart goes out to you for losing your friend, because I know that too. I'm very familiar with street life, very familiar. Um, and some of our lost warriors are out there, man. They're, whether they're addicts or in gangs or whatever it be. That's always where I found a lot of good, strong people out there in the streets. Like, even living in Toronto, like most of the people that were in my graph crew and everything, we were all like, we found each other because we are like living on the streets. And like there was like our culture and our identity was like that bond between us, plus our love for like hip hop culture and things like that. But I just I want to thank you for sharing that, man, because it's so true. Some of our strongest ones are out there on the streets. And
Yeah, I appreciate everything that everyone's shared already. And I hope that there's, yeah, folks out there listening and taking it in respectfully. Um, and I think that this is kind of like the last question. But it's, oh, were you going to say something now?
Yeah, I just wanted to touch on the question that we were working on right now.
Oh, yeah, sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Okay. I yeah, thank you, Koksilah. Sending my condolences for our brother. Um, we do have a lot of really strong, powerful, young warriors out there, and my heart does go out to them as well. And I think that a lot of misogyny and colonialism has been so normalized into communities like reservations and culture. I'm figuring out now that I guess like gender roles are being really used in like my cultural teachings, I guess. Like a lot of things get passed towards the men and the boys, and they always get held highly. And I'm just like starting to feel like that isn't the way our people were, and that it wasn't just a one gender type thing where we just listen to one gender and they're the only people that are in charge. I'm just trying to speak about like the different ways of colonialism, I guess, that has affected our communities, but also our culture and our way of life. It has just messed up our, I guess, our perspective on our own culture. It is just, there's a lot of work that does need to be done, and I don't know what else to say. Sorry.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And sorry I skipped you, Nobs. I'm like losing track here. But like, yeah, so much good knowledge and sharing going on. I wanted to ask you all kind of like this idea of, it seems like it's all tied together, like this gender-based violence and needing to like heal like harms in our communities. And and like thinking about ways to create safer spaces. And some of you have like touched on this already of like how to like hold each other up when we're hurting and um, when we need to take breaks. But I guess the question is like how, yeah, how do we hold each other up and hold each other up when we are hurt or harmed on the front lines? And are there ways that we can create safe spaces, or do you have any examples of um, safe spaces that you've been a part of on the front lines and that have felt good? Um, yeah, I guess that's kind of like a lot, but open to hearing different thoughts and reflections.
Sure. Um, I'll say this, that I have not always felt like, even like in our indigenous groups, as groups, I've not always felt they were safe spaces. But as some friends, uh, some of my one-on-ones with friends I've made, I have felt very safe with. Um, as an indigenous man who's been on front lines variously, I'm not gonna say that I've always been perfect, and I have fucked up. And for me, it was my friends who had the, I don't know what the word would be, but they had the confidence, I guess, to come to me personally and talk to me about issues. You know, and it's those, like, that idea of community in which we hold each other and ourselves accountable. That's what works, in my experience. And I'm very appreciative of all my friends and family who have come to me and talked to me, uh, even if they didn't do it in like the nicest of ways. Uh, Lots of love for all of them. Hey,
I think that for me, the front lines kind of was a safe place for a long time for me, even despite like the things that had happened there. For me, like when I left university, I was in a really dark place and my life was really painful. And for me, going to the front lines where I was in this community space that I'd never been in before, where there was such a level of care, wherein um, before I didn't really know how to keep a sleep schedule or to get myself out of bed every day or to even eat meals properly. But in being on the front lines in a space where everyone was kind of cooking for each other and sitting down for meals and working in the day to create these spaces, like sleep became easier, eating regularly became easier, and kind of there's like a mental health security and like that sort of healthy routine. The safe spaces that I find in the front lines and outside of the front lines with other youth and land defenders is kind of from these relationships of love that I have with them. I learned a lot about what it means to love other people, to love the land, to love elders, and to love people that I've never even met in being on the front lines. And how special it is to have had elders come up to me and say, thank you for doing this work for our territory that we can't do anymore. And like, these are all like very important things to me. And it does, and I don't want to say these to romanticize the front lines because they are still a violent place and they are still a place that hold misogyny and sexual violence, as we've talked about before. But I think that creating safe space, we kind of have to reimagine like love as we've been taught. And the love that we've been taught is so affected by colonialism and trauma bonds and abuse and violence that it's not kind love, it's not really what sustains us. when I think of the love that does, it's the I don't know where it originates, but I've heard a lot like the statement in Love and Rage, we do this in love and rage, because there is love in being enraged for the things that you, your family, your relatives, and people like you have gone through. And so when I think about like reimagining love to keep each other safe and resting down those kinds of harms that we do to people we love because we expect them to stay, like treating each other kinder and understanding that calling out like predators is an act of love. It's an act of love for the movement to expect us to be able to do better than that, and it's an act of love for everyone else that person could hurt. And those are the things that I kind of associate and I think about when thinking about creating a safe space. I'd like to pass it on.
Something that my dad always told me once I started doing this work was to always come from a place of love, which is kind of, I guess, what Autumn was saying as well. But it gets so easy to be mad and to just be so angry at the people who are out here doing the work at these companies. But and I'm still mad. Like, believe me, I'm super pissed off every day I see an industry vehicle drive by me. But that's not why I'm here. I'm here because I have a lot of love for this land. I have love for a future where my niece and my baby brother get to come and drink the waters from this river. They get to pick the berries on our territories. And so I try to remember that when things are really hard out here, um, that I'm here because I love the possibility of a future for our peoples on our lands. And I think that's so integral to doing this work. And it's so easy to get burnt out when you're so mad all the time, because anger takes up a lot of energy, and it's so exhausting. But that's really why I stay here. And because I know that my ancestors had all that love for me so that I could be here now doing this work, so that maybe my niece and my baby brother and their children can also have the same option to be able to be on the land and to eat wild salmon, and all these different things. I think that's so crucial. When I was at the legislature, it was one of the first times I was really involved in ceremony, and I was welcomed into ceremony. And it really opened my eyes and what it meant to care for our lands and to be connected to our lands. And so I think that's just really important. When I got invited home during our time at the legislature by our hereditary chiefs, and Gina did as well, as along with two other Gitsan youth who had been at the legislature. And I remember when I went back, my stepmom said that I would see the land and the people in a whole new way. And she was right. And that's really why I'm here, is just seeing that new connection to land that I hadn't had in my life before. And knowing that other people can also have that is so integral in creating these safe spaces. Wet'suwet'en people should be able to be on these territories without the threats that we face right now. And so I think in creating safer spaces, we have to be able to manage or to imagine just a new world in which that's possible.
Hey guys, all good stuff. So how do we hold each other up when we're hurting? And also, how do we create a safe space? Let's see, I'll start with creating a safe. How do we create a safe space when we're on the front line? One thing I have seen plague many movements is the white savior complex. People come in, they have this idea that they're going to come and step in there for the first time, and they're gonna fucking change. They're gonna make history and solve everything for you. It's not fucking like that. Some people get killed over this kind of a thing, you know. So what we need to do, and what we've done in the past, like when we had Haudenosaunee camp at Standing Rock or in Caledonia, we had an indigenous space, like a teepee or something, which we also had at Get 'em Den. There's a space for indigenous people to go when you're, you know, a little overwhelmed and things are getting hard. It's just at least a space you can go sit where maybe somebody else that gets it, another indigenous person, when you've had enough time, can come and talk to you instead of having non-indigenous people tell us how we should feel about our struggle and what we're fighting. There's nothing more frustrating than the white savior complex, you know, while all the shit's going on. And I really think that makes it safer for us because we feel safe that we can actually grieve or feel feelings, be human without being judged by, you know, the, I wouldn't say the person that's creating the problem, but that kind of mind state, that kind of thinking, you know, that white savior complex. It's just like, so that's what we can do for a safe place, is try to create indigenous spaces. Now, another thing we were talking about here was, how do we hold each other up? Now, um, I've been to jail before, and in jail you don't have anything. Everyone wears the same color. No one has nothing on no one, you know. And it's just like when you're out on a front line, it's the same thing. Like, we don't have like the basic necessities of human life. We're in harsh living conditions, wearing the same clothes. We're we're dealing with a lot. There's a lot of chaos and violence going around us. But it's just like that. It's like, whatever skill set you have, how can you lift people up? Believe it or not, your skill set, you know, like, just do little things for people. Like, so for me, I used to be a chef, and I also run dispensaries here in Ontario. So I always tried to use those skill sets to bring that to the front line to help people that are having a hard time. Or I make Cinnabons better than Cinnabon does. Like, I used to make Cinnabons and go give them to people, you know, and like I would cook pizza at camp on a wood stove oven. And like, just little things like that bring people comfort in a hard time. When I was in Standing Rock, I would make tamales and corn soup and just go out and give people food, you know. There's things you can do. You can make a dream catcher for someone. You can write a poem for someone that tells them how awesome they are and how much you appreciate the little things about them. You can make moccasins. You can draw for people. You can sing to people. You can talk to people. You can build for people. You can care for people. There's so much we can do that we have. And a lot of it is like, we have to again look at ourselves and who are we and what do we have to bring to the table, you know. Because sometimes it, even being on the front line, it goes beyond being able to be on the front line. It's like, what do you bring to the front line, you know? So I think that's how we can hold each other up, is realizing who we are and what we have and how we can bring that to other people. Uh, yeah, you know.
Mhm.
Knobs, you want to share?
Sorry. Safe place. You know, as weird as it sounds, like, I think my safe place is like in my room with like pizza as well. I'm not really I'm not the type of person that really likes big groups, and that really started to show when I started on the front lines, because of these group stuff that we'd have to do and creating a safe environment for the people that are on the front lines. But I cannot even think for the life of me how to answer this question, sorry.
No need to apologize. Yeah, well, I feel like just we're gonna wrap up now because I think we have to be done. Oh, we're supposed to be done by now. But just thank you all so much for like everything that you've shared and all, yeah, like the stories that you've shared. And I think that these conversations have really highlighted like what work that our generation is doing for the movement, and like we're part of a continuum of people who have been doing this work, but like addressing this gender-based violence and sexualized violence that is within our movements and that we're also fighting against, and the psychological harms of just being an Indigenous person, but then also being on the front lines. And it's things I think that like we're talking about and we're really battling now, so that the next generations aren't going to have to do it and go through what we're going through. So I just really appreciate everyone like being honest and open about those experiences and bringing that, you know, to life, that we're not okay with those things and we're not going to allow them in our movements anymore. And I just want to say too, like this, for me, just like having this conversation is like a safe space, like being around people that I don't have to like explain what I'm fighting for, or, you know, like we all understand like our responsibilities and our commitments like to this work, even when it's hard. And so I really appreciate that. And I feel like that's like good medicine for me. And it's that's like to fight isolation, just like telling our stories and like being heard by each other, I feel like is so important. And I think a lot of things came up tonight that like for people who want to support the work of like young Indigenous people, BIPOC people who are on the front lines, like there's lots of ways to do that. Especially like hearing about your thoughts on like financial security, and it's like the stories about how like, yeah, that affects mental health. And so just to like remind people who are listening that there is a Chuffed fundraiser for these folks here on the panel, and also other young Indigenous folks and BIPOC folks that are on the front lines. And so if that is a way that you can contribute to frontline resistance, you can find that link on the Koksilah website on the front page, and also in the Facebook chat. But that is all for tonight. So I just want to say thank you to all the panelists for blessing us all with your knowledge and sharing a little bit about yourselves and your stories. And that's it. Thank you. I don't know if we're no longer live, but thank you guys so much.
Yala Kasla.
That was so nice.
Koksjan.
Hala Kasla. Yes, Bolomania.
Koksilah.
Oh, Navi's gone.
Oh, I was just gonna say I can leave.